Devarim Perak Yud Bet, Deuteronomy chapter 12. Ela hachukim v'amishpatim asher tishmerun la'asot ba'aretz asher natan Adonai Elohei avotecha lecha l'rishta kol hayamim asher atem chayim al ha'adamah. So Moshe continues and he says, these are the rules, the regulations that you have to carefully observe in the land that God will give you as long as you live on earth. And we alluded to this a couple of times over the last couple of weeks, that there seems to be this assumption that the rules and the laws only have to be done in Israel, right? When you in this land, and this idea of Nachmanides, who sort of proposes the idea that the commandments outside the land of Israel is sort of more practice, and in the land of Israel it is reality. And I think that the Rambam Nachmanides still kept the mitzvot outside Israel, but it's an interesting notion, and it's based in many ways upon sort of the wording here that you have to do these commandments in the land that I will give you. I think that the reason ultimately why Moshe is saying that is less of whether or not the mitzvot are obligatory outside Israel, but more it's, again, he wants to make sure that the children of Israel continue to do commandments and continue to follow God's commands and the covenant even after he's gone and they are in the land of Israel. Continuing in verse 2, Abei tabduna kol ha'mekomot asher avdu sham hagoyim asher atem yorshim otam et Elohem al haharim haramim v'al hagvaot v'tachat kol eitz ra'anan. You have to destroy all of the sites, the nations that you dispossess, all their gods, the mountains, the hills, the fancy trees. Right? Tear down all their altars, destroy all of their places. That needs to be completely obliterated. The opposite of the worship of God is idolatry. We want to have the covenant. We want to remain on the land, and therefore we have to get rid of all of these idolatrous practices in the land of Israel. Lo tasun kain la'Adonai Elohechem. Do not worship God in this manner. What does it mean, do not worship God in this manner? Not don't destroy what is God, but rather, verse 5, Ki ela makom asher yivchar Adonai Elohechem mikol shiftechem lasum et shmo sham l'shichno tidreshu uvatashamo. The place that God will choose, that's where you will go to worship God. So God, you cannot worship God all over, anywhere you want, on top of any mountain. There's going to be a specific place where you go to offer sacrifices, to consult with God. For many years before it was Jerusalem, we know, of course, it was in the city of Shiloh. According to tradition, for 369 years, the temple in Shiloh stood until its destruction during the end of the life of Eli, during the early part of the period of the life of Shmuel, the prophet. What's interesting here, and then we'll get back in, is that it makes it sound like God is going to choose the place. But what we'll see in time is that sort of it's not just God who chooses the place, but it's a sort of a combination between God and King David. David HaMelech, buys the plot of land of Arvona or Arnona Hayevusi and builds an altar there, and that is the place that is selected. So God selects it, but David is the one who goes and buys it. And really, even though Moshe says here it's the place that God's going to choose, in many ways it's also the place that God chooses because of the desire, because of what King David does in the future. God will pick Jerusalem. Let's continue in verse 6. Va'aveitem shama, and to that place, as opposed to on every mountain and every hill and every tree, you should bring olotechem v'zivchechem v'yat masrotechem v'yat trumat yatchem v'nidrechem v'nidvotechem v'v'chorot b'karchem v'tzomchem. All of your sacrifices, all of the different ones go there. V'achaltem sham l'fnei Adonai Elohechem usmachtem b'chol mishlach yadchem atem uvatechem asher berachacha Adonai Elohecha. And that's where you should eat all the food, right? This sounds like very good for the commerce of Jerusalem. You want to bring the sacrifice, you have to go to Jerusalem. You want to eat the food that you're bringing, you have to do it in Jerusalem. So it's going to be very beneficial to ultimately where this place is. And continuing verse 8, Lo tasun v'chol asher anachnu osim po hayom ish kol hayashar be'einav. You can't do what is done here these days, where each of us is just doing what we think is correct. This phrase will come to more in the book of Shoftim. This is going to become an important phrase. Ish kol hayashar be'einav ya'aseh, that a person does basically what they believe is right. Sometimes that sounds very good. Sounds like liberty, sounds like freedom. But other times it can go from being freedom and choice to being anarchy. And so here Moshe is saying maybe we have a little bit of anarchy, maybe there's not sort of set rules. We're going to get to Israel, there need to be set rules. Jerusalem's going to be the place you worship God. You can't just do it. Because you have not yet come to the place that God is giving you. You will get there. Verse 10, you'll cross over the river. And you will settle in the land that God is going to give to you. And God will grant you safety from all the enemies that are around you, and you will live in security. You will live fine. And the place that God will command you to build this temple or whatever it is to God, what we will later call the Beit HaMikdash in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. There you need to bring all of the items that I have commanded you to bring. So again, the very same thing Moshe is saying, where it has to be, it's going to be in a central location. That's where this is going to have to happen. And ultimately, in many ways, it seems like Moshe is sort of doing three things to me in this chapter. Number one, he's telling Bnei Yisrael, again, you are going to go into the land of Israel. Don't be scared. Don't be worried. This is going to happen. God is going to protect you. God's going to fight for you, and you're going to be able to do this. A second thing, there's going to be a place that God chooses. We can't have this anarchy. Anybody can offer a sacrifice anywhere. That's going to lead to heresy. It's going to lead to worship of idolatry. We have to have things very structured. And together, along with that, it's not only the worry of idolatry, but behind the scenes is also this idea of keeping Bnei Yisrael together. We saw this at the end of Bamidbar in certain places where we have sort of this faction. Is somebody part of a tribe, or are they part of the children of Israel? If the members of the leaders of the tribe of Binyamin say, if the daughters of Shlofchad go and marry somebody from a different tribe, then part of the territory of Binyamin is going to go to a different tribe, and our Binyamin will lose part of their territory. So, we say, who cares? They're all members, they're all Israelites, they're all Jewish people, it's all the same people. But there is this tension between the different tribes. They haven't really coalesced fully as a full, Bnei Yisrael. The Kohen Gadol might wear the 12 stones on his breastplate. He might have the names of the 12 tribes on his shoulders. Maybe that's there to try to tell Bnei Yisrael over and over again, you're part of the same thing. And how are we, So if everybody has to go to the same place, if everybody has to worship in the same way, that hopefully should coalesce the people into being one united nation, but it's not going to be a simple thing. Continuing in verse 12. And you shall rejoice before God, you, your sons, your daughters, your male slaves, your female slaves, along with the Levites who have no territory among you. What's important there to me is, it's a holiday for everybody. This is not the treatment of the slaves and the black and the This is saying you're going to enjoy yourselves. You're going to go. It's going to be a holiday for you, but it's going to be a holiday. It has to be a holiday for everybody. Everybody has to celebrate. Hishamer lecha pent halalotecha b'chol makom asher tereh. Moshe says, be careful not to offer your burnt offerings, your sacrifices in any place. He says it's now already for the third time. Kiim b'makom asher yivchar Adonai b'achad shivatecha, but rather in the place which God will choose for all of you in one of the tribal territories, It's going to be in somebody's tribe. It could be in the tribe of Zvulun, it could be a tribe of Menashe, it could be a tribe of Yehuda, it could be a tribe of Binyamin. It's going to be in somebody's tribe, but it's going to be sort of an international city. It's going to be a city for all of the Jewish people. That's where you're going to offer your sacrifices. Continuing in verse 15, pasuk Tedvav, rak b'chol avat nafshecha tizbach v'chalta basar kiverkat Adonai Elohecha asher natan lach b'chol sha'arecha tameh b'hatahor yachlenu. Here Moshe makes a very significant change. It doesn't really matter for vegetarians, but it matters to those who consume meat, which is up to this point in time when the Jews were in the desert. If you wanted to eat meat, you had to bring it as a sacrifice to the temple. And that was easy because it was a smaller group of people who were living around the Mishkan in the desert. What's going to happen when you live 50 miles away, 60 miles away from Jerusalem and you want to have lamb for dinner? You have to go to Jerusalem. You have to slaughter the sacrifice there. No. Moshe says, if you want to have lamb for dinner, and they didn't have meat and chicken for dinner the same way and the same amount we have it, then you can slaughter the animal and eat meat up in Dan, down in Beersheba, on the coast next to the Jordan River, you do not have to go all the way to Jerusalem. That's a significant change in terms of what's happened. So there is the sacrifices, and not you have to go to Jerusalem. But if you want to have dinner, you want to have chicken or meat, and you have to slaughter your animal, you don't have to go to Jerusalem. Rak adam lo tochelu. Verse 16, you cannot eat the blood, as we've been told numerous times in the Torah. You have to pour out the blood like water. However, unlike if you just want to have meat for dinner, things that are ties, grain or wine or oil or the first of the flocks or the herds, all of those things, and any things that are, again, karbanot, even if it's not an obligatory korban, even if it's a karban, a neder, and a dava, I want to offer the sacrifice. Those things you cannot just do it like you could slaughter the chicken for your dinner tonight. You have to consume it before God in the place that God will choose, your sons, your daughters, your male slaves, your female slaves, all of the Levites. You do that, and you have to be joyous in all your time there in front of God. And together with that, again, the Levites are going to have the same amount. They have 48 cities. We've been told that it's given to them. They are given large territories the way we are. So you can't forget them. They have to be part and parcel of your joy, of your celebration. You have to share with them. Continuing in verse 20. And when God comes and he enlarges your territory as he said he will do. And he's going to say, eat some meat. Again, Moshe says the same thing. You're going to want to have meat. You're going to be living wealthy. You want to have dinner. Right? You're going to be, again, like we said earlier, 50, 60 miles, 100 miles away from Jerusalem. How are you going to? So no, you can go and you can slaughter your animal as you wish. You can slaughter your animal wherever you are. Moshe says here two words, kasher tziviticha, as I've commanded you. And I think the Rambam and others point to the fact that this sort of implies the idea of a Torah Shabbal Peh, because nowhere earlier in the Torah has Moshe told them how they are supposed to slaughter animals. But Moshe says here, I have kasher tziviticha, as I have commanded you. So there's certain things that Moshe has told Bnei Yisrael which are not recorded in the Torah. And this is a verse that there are those who point to say there was this oral tradition that went along with the written tradition of the 5 books of Moses, which we have. Moshe continues, right? You can eat the animals. It can be the pure and the impure. These are not sacrifice. You don't have to be ritually pure to have chicken for dinner tonight or to have meat for dinner, or gazelle for that matter. And again, you are not allowed to eat the blood. There's something about the blood that you are not allowed to eat. It presents it, it gives the life to the flesh. Lo toklenu, don't eat it. Al aretz tishbechenu kamayim. You must pour it out onto the ground like water. Lo toklenu, do not eat it. Laman yitavlacha. Not eating the blood. This may have been related to some sort of cult, idolatrous worship. It's not clear exactly what the reason is. Here, God says, the Torah says that the blood is the life force, the vitality of the animal. Why is that? What's the difference between that and eating some eating some of the flesh? But right, Moshe is saying this is a command, and God is permitting you to eat meat, so you can only eat the parts that God has permitted. Don't go and eat beyond that. Again, the stress for the 4th or the 5th time in the chapter, anything that is holy, anything that is sacred, anything sacrificial, anything related to tithes, that you have to go to the place that God will choose. And there you have to offer the sacrifice in the way that we have said in the past, on the altar, the blood, all of the rituals we've said before. And be careful to follow these commandments. And again, the stress, because that is what's going to allow you to remain in the land of Israel. A few more verses. So again, Moshe says, when God cuts down the nations, again, stressing them, this will happen, and you dispossess them, and you are now living in the land that God gives you. Do not be lured away from them after they've been wiped out before you. Don't inquire of their gods. Who you should be doresh, who you should inquire of? You should inquire of God, not of these idolatrous. Lama laimor, and you will inquire of their God, saying, you'll say, these people who lived here before, they worship these gods, so I'm going to do the same. Don't do that. Don't act that way towards God. Because the people, they performed all of the hideous, horrible things that God hates. And you think that this is just radical stuff that God's saying to you, don't be idolatrous. You have to understand, idolatry is not just bowing down to an idol. It's about a human cult. It's about human sacrifices. It's slaughtering your children. It's about burning them in the fire for idols. And that goes against. The Torah is about elongating life. Yes, animals get sacrificed in God's temple, but not humans. We believe in the preservation of life. And that is why what the commandments are supposed to do, they're supposed to enrich you, and they're supposed to preserve life. And so you cannot do these things. Here, idolatry is connected with this cult of death, of destruction, of killing, of murder of people. And that is ultimately, we could say many reasons why the Torah is so opposed to it, as being truly a betrayal of God. It's betrayal of God. It's betrayal of your fellow human being. And thus it is roundly prohibited and warned to Bnei Israel many, many times that they need to continue to worship God in the way that Moshe is telling them to do here in this chapter and in the many chapters that we had before, and some chapters that we will have coming up in the next few days.